Hello, welcome to episode 220 of Herpetological Highlights. My name's Tom Major. Co-hosting with me, as always, is Ben Marshall.
Hello, hello.
And 220th episode. We have got an episode about toads this week. We're going to be talking about, I would say, probably one of Ben's favourite animals in the whole wide world. So
especially these ones specifically.
Yeah, they are cool. Obviously you've got a history with this toad. You did research on them, but also, we've both collectively enjoyed them in their native habitats.
Yeah.
They're cool. And I mean, as we'll see during this episode, they're real survivors. They're real invaders, although, they're not consciously invading. Each individual toad is just trying its very best to live. They mean no harm, but they inadvertently cause a lot of harm. We're talking about
more
Asian
complexity hidden amongst them than perhaps was thought.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, you think it's one toad, but maybe it's more. So let's introduce the paper. There are like a million authors here, so sorry, yes. I think it's too much. So
I think it's probably too much.
Yeah. But this is by Dufresnes et al. 2025, so hot off the press. This is the first paper of 2025 that we will be discussing: speciation and historical invasions of the Asian black-spined toad, Dufresnes melanostictus, published in Nature Communications. So yeah, Asian spined toads, one of our favorites. They've come up on the podcast a lot. These big, silly, toxic toads, which are found all over South and Southeast Asia and India.
Yeah, basically from Pakistan to like Indonesia, sort of is a sort of long axis of their distribution, I'd say, right?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like where you find them, when you find them, they tend to be pretty common. Like we've seen them, we used to see them all the time in Thailand, didn't we, when we were both out there? I've also seen them in India and seen them. Yeah, they're always in places where you'd kind of not really expect necessarily to see a toad either. You just like get out your car in a car park and there's just this toad. You're like, okay, mate, what are you doing?
Well, that's it.
Very tolerant.
They are known to be, I suppose, adaptable is the right term, but also just sort of tolerant of that classic human disturbance sort of situation where other amphibians may be more susceptible to the sort of detrimental effects of human changes. These guys are toughen it out, which is, partly the problem too, because they're tough enough to stow away on boats, trucks, and other vehicles of people moving around, and they can hitchhike their way around and have appeared in places they are perhaps not naturally meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of this sort of willingness and ability to live alongside people, they are known as a commensal species, and they are toxic, they're poisonous. So toads in the family Bufonidae have the ability to produce these, what are they called? Bufotoxins.
Bufotoxins. I think that's the sort of general grouping for all of them. If I'm remembering correctly, the one specifically is a what is it? Cardioglycoside, I think. Is that the word for it? I think so.
That sounds right, because they are potent cardiotoxic cocktails that come out of these glands on the neck. So if you were to lick one or try and eat one, which does happen occasionally by accident because they do kind of look a bit tasty, especially if you're into eating amphibians, what happens is it interferes with your blood cells, disrupts the membranes of your blood cells, and they undergo lysis, which is like where your blood cells basically just explode, right? So obviously having exploded blood cells, I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure that's not good for you. And so it is considered a risk to people if you swallow them. Pets as well, like people's dogs and stuff will attack these things and they'll regret it pretty soon after. And people are thought to have died from these. But the reason we're talking about them, Ben, because as you alluded to at the top of the show, they are currently just one big species that's found in this massive distribution all across South and Southeast Asia. But they've also been getting around for quite some years. So there's been toads intercepted in loads of different countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Southern Africa, a host of other places. But they've successfully launched invasions in Madagascar and Wallacea. Wallacea being the kind of easternmost part of Indonesia, and some other islands there, which is the sort of deep water islands. They're separated by deep water. That's what they're famous for, Wallacea.
That's also sort of the reason why toads aren't originally there, right? Like, you've got toads distributed across most of Indonesia, but when you start getting into these deeper water islands, that's been the cut-off of toads go no further unless they're given a little helping hand, potentially.
Precisely. These toads are adaptable and they can swim, but not in salt water. It's not good for them.
Right.
They'll suck up the salt and then they'll turn into goo. So this paper, they got genomes from a bunch of different toads from all over the place. And their kind of mission was to look at the diversity of this species, given that it is a really successful invader. We're always looking for more information about invasive species. And they wanted to know where these invaders were coming from. So the ones which had been introduced into Madagascar and Wallacea, this eastern part of Indonesia, where did they come from? And how much diversity is there in these toads? And also, why not, while we're at it, sample really widely across the whole natural distribution and learn as much as we possibly can about these silly little toads? And I think probably the finding which will interest most people the most, which is big news, is that this species, Dufresnes melanostictus, is actually probably at least two species.
I mean, that's the kicker. There was a previous study that was looking at mitochondrial stuff that sort of ID'd the Madagascar side of things, of being from sort of Vietnam, Cambodia sort of area, and they've backed that up with the important. This study's doing the nucleic DNA side of things and the mitochondrial side of things, and all that evidence combined, looking pretty reasonable that there's at least going to be an east-west sort of split. Basically everything from Myanmar east being one species, and everywhere sort of northwest of that, so northern India and things, being a separate one, with one weird exception, which is Indonesia. The Indonesian toads, specifically your sort of Sumatra area, seem to be closely related to the toads living in sort of southwest India, weirdly.
Yeah, so they do talk about that, don't they? And like,
they do.
It's not just that they're most closely related; they're almost like genetically indistinguishable.
Right.
They are pretty much. So yeah, the ones in Indonesia, despite having had to come across 2,000 kilometers of sea, are pretty much indistinguishable from the Indian toads. And they suggest the reason for that is probably sailors, basically. The likelihood of them having rafted across naturally is pretty slim. It's not impossible, these things do happen, and these toads are pretty resilient, but that's a long way to come across
it's a very long way, and you'd expect them to have made their ways to like the Nicobar Islands and things like that naturally.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of like, okay, they can do the 2,000 kilometers to get to Indonesia, but they couldn't do the sort of equivalent or less journey to some of these other islands.
Yeah.
It's
not
a stretch.
Compelling. It's not parsimonious. So yeah, these toads in Indonesia, they're relatively recent invasives. Well, not invasives. It's difficult, isn't it? This is kind of where the lines get a bit blurred because they've been there for a long time. But they probably came with sailors from India between hundreds and a couple of thousand years ago. So Indonesia has this early connection with South India and Sri Lanka. At least 2,000 years ago, they started trading by boat. And there's archaeological evidence for having Indian goods in Indonesia and vice versa as long as 2,000 years ago. So the likelihood is that these toads hitched a ride with sailors, either by accident within their stocks, because,
Right.
if you're transporting like some bamboo or something, that's probably going to be full of toads. But equally, a lot of people think these toads are good luck, and they do have quite quizzical, endearing faces. So I think they are. I think they're quite lucky. So
I think absolutely they're good luck. You see a toad, it's a joyous occasion. What more luck can you ask for?
They really do brighten up your day. I remember every single one of these that I've ever seen, and yeah, they are quizzical, funny little characters. So yeah, you've got this relationship where they're kind of split east to west, as you just described. You've got the South Asian ones in India, and you've got Indonesia and sort of the Western Indonesian ones as one clump, and then you've got Southeast Asian ones as the other clump. And this is quite a common split that you see in herpetofauna, because there is the mountains there, which kind of split lots of different animals. What is it? It's the what do you call it? Indo-Burmese. What's that mountain range called? Can you remember? Indo-Burman mountains, and that's kind of this like traditional or like well-known biogeographic transition. So lots of other species have.
I like the idea that the animals are being, they're speciating because of tradition, as opposed to
this is
being actively prevented from easily crossing this area.
It's the way it has always been. We do not cross the Indo-Burman mountains. But, like climate change has also exacerbated that. So, not the most recent climate change that we're contributing to, but like slightly less recent climate change, because it's got wetter and cooler. So those mountains have become a little bit less hospitable to cross as well. And so they reckon they've been split, these two groups of these toads, for probably 7 or 8 million years, which is a really long time in toad split years. Like lots of species are described on having splits, which are way less ancient than that. So there are a few names available for this toad already, so it's probably not going to be a new name, exciting thing. There's been a few in the past, as it has been suggested by authors way back in the day that these were different. So there will probably be a new name coming formally at some point. What is cool about this, though, is so should we talk about where the invasive ones came from? So you alluded to it earlier, the Madagascar ones.
Just before we do, I did also want to. You were saying about the sort of how different they are genetically, and it is sort of important to pop up that in the mitochondrial tree that they present, there are some species that are separated off, as in other Dufresnes species, which are sitting in amongst the Western Eastern Melanostictus split. So there's already accepted species that are more closely related to the Western Melanostictus than the Eastern. So it's this sort of, well, if they're going to remain species, then the Eastern one definitely sort of has to be split off to make any sense. Otherwise, you've got species nested within something that you're terming a species. So it's seeming like if we're sort of consistently splitting them, that they are going to end up being separate species.
Yeah. And the ones in Madagascar came from Southeast Asia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the ones in Eastern Indonesia have migrated from Western Indonesia, which isn't altogether surprising. So, you've got this invasive species from Indonesia moving further east in Indonesia across the deep water thanks to people. And then the ones from Southeast Asia have been transported to Madagascar, where they've obviously been causing quite a lot of chaos.
And you have some in the UAE as well, right?
Oh, yeah. They're also from Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah. So big implications that the sort of shipping routes are probably responsible for those populations. And and when we say Southeast Asia, like we can narrow it down a little bit more. Sort of, it's got to be Vietnam, southern China, Taiwan, Cambodia, Thailand, or Malaysia, right?
What other countries are there in Southeast Asia?
I'm just thinking, the borders of, like, it's not going to be Singapore because that's a different group.
Sure.
It's not going to be the top end of Indonesia. It's like, it's not Myanmar, for example. It's not like it's on the cusp of between two different types.
Yeah. All right, valid. So they're still moving around today. I actually found it cool.
Well, actually, even more specifically, it can't even be the southern China ones.
All right.
Or
fair enough. So it's somewhere in Southeast Asia that isn't Singapore, southern China, or Myanmar.
I think you can Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And so one thing I thought that was cool, Ben, was that they found one toad in North Vietnam, didn't they? And it didn't have a genetic signature that you would expect from a North Vietnamese toad. It had a much similar relationship to the toads from South Vietnam, which are genetically distinguishable from their Northern Vietnam cousins. And they think that this toad basically very recently got in a car and drove up there, which I think is hilarious.
Right up Vietnam.
Yeah, it's just so funny to think that like normally in these kinds of studies you find, these animals have this signature that they came from somewhere, but you don't usually find the exact individual that did the traveling. It's normally like the descendants of the animals that did the traveling. Whereas this one is literally this specific creature probably just got in a car by either deliberately or by mistake, and then found itself the other end of Vietnam. And it's like, here I am. Here's my genes. Check it out. And then, wow, okay, cool.
It does make sense, though. It does make sense that this travel is sort of very actively happening.
Oh, yeah. This is kind of what I wanted to end on when we're talking about this species, is that, like, you know, they're such hardcore survivors. They have this ability to live alongside humans. And the fact that they're like sort of slightly quizzical and endearing, they've got more places yet to invade, I think. And unless we work out an effective way of stopping them, this isn't the last time we're going to talk about them.
I reckon you're almost certainly right. And it is sort of an indicator that, try harder in terms of the biosecurity sort of angle, because, I mean, these guys are going to take every advantage they can. I mean, I suppose they're not, that's making it sound like they're actively trying to invade, which is unfair. But they're ready, they're tough. They'll sit on a boat for multiple weeks.
Oh, yeah, they'll wait it out. So we've kind of going from one end of the spectrum in terms of like range expansion to the exact polar opposite with our species of the bye week this week. So we're going to a really range-restricted animal, actually, something which has an absolutely minuscule range. So this is a tiny little new species of chameleon, published by Rakatoarason, Hassiniana, Glor and Vences 2024, a new miniaturized species of leaf chameleon, genus Brachysia, from a littoral forest fragment in eastern Madagascar. So tiny chameleon.
Tiny.
Yeah,
we're talking
silly small.
Like 1.5 centimeters.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to Emerson for sending us this paper. Thank you. It was really hard to get hold of. But yeah, so they're small, right? Brachysia are some of the smallest chameleons you can get. There are a couple of species.
I feel like they're some of the smallest vertebrates you can get.
Yeah, they compete with those silly little frogs to be the smallest vertebrates. You know, the animal can only get so small before it can no longer have a face. And that is pretty much what determines how small things can get.
Is its face? They're face limited, are they?
They're face limited, yeah. I mean, they're sort of head structure limited, aren't they? Because those little weird toadlets have to forego being able to
balance.
Balance, because their ears are too small to have
overwhelmed by small amounts of G-force that they produce by jumping with their own legs.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, but these chameleons are tiny, and some of the smallest vertebrates, like you say, Ben. So this genus Brachysia includes Micra and Nana, which are as small as 22 millimeters. This one we're talking about today is going to be a little bit bigger, but prior to this paper, there were 13 species of this genus Brachysia, and there's actually another one that's not this one, which is still waiting for a name, apparently. So there's probably going to be another one coming. Excellent. And they're often found in these really small forest fragments, and only a few of them are known from more than one location. So they tend to be extremely range restricted, not least because there's a hell of a lot of deforestation in Madagascar. So these patches tend to be quite small.
Right. I would also imagine the dispersal ability of a creature that is about 2 centimeters long is somewhat limited, given that they can't fly.
Yes, they just... how far can it walk if it's 2 centimeters long?
Truly. And presumably, like other Brachysia, reasonably short lifespan too. So even if they were to set out on a grand journey, how far is it going to get before it dies of old age?
Oh, it's so sad. But you're right. They do their thing, though. They eat the tiny bugs in the leaves. I'm not
saying they're not important. I'm just saying it's not going to get far before it dies.
As long as that's not what you're saying, because they are important. They're important to me. And so, yeah, they've called this one Brachysia nofi, and it's a really nice name, actually. It's derived from the Malagasy word nofi, which means dream. So this is reflectant of its association with the type locality Ankinini nofi, which is this forest fragment. And it also refers to the ongoing regeneration of the forest in this locality. So there's, I a hotel which is kind of leading the way, trying to regenerate this forest, and it has been for about 20 years. And finally, the name refers to, so because they're regenerating the forest, they said this can be seen as a dream come true, a chance for sustainable conservation of these microendemic Brookesia, because it means dream. So quite poetic, actually.
Yeah.
And basically there's this hotel, and they take tourists on night walks, and they go and see these silly little things. And they have been doing that for quite some time. And as a result, the forest, which was largely destroyed, I get the impression, has been regrowing for 20 years under the guidance of the hotel workers. So, big up, because if it wasn't for that hotel, we actually may not even ever have found out this thing existed before it went extinct.
And yet there it is, like a dream in the forest. And hopefully in a bit of forest that's going to be protected for the foreseeable future, which is great.
Yeah. They talk about when they were doing this surveying for this one, they saw another forest fragment nearby, which was just ablaze. So, yes, not an easy situation in Madagascar, but little papers like this describing these new chameleons are always a nice source of optimism for us.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, I said it wasn't quite as small as 22 millimeters. It's 33 millimeters long.
Is that including the tail?
Could be. Don't know.
I think it is. Yeah.
33 millimeters.
2 centimeters SVL.
Wow. So what else?
They're the sort of classic Brookesia shape too. We haven't sort of really touched on. So this little sort of chubby leaf-shaped chameleon, very pale, sort of a pale tan. I would sort of say with darker sort of patches along its sort of back. If I'm looking at the right one. Yes, I am. Sort of dark around the eye, darker legs, kind of sort of mottled, sort of camouflagey, pale leaf patterniness, I would say.
Quite a fat tail. Quite a fat, short tail. And the end of the tail is also prehensile. They can wrap it around stuff.
Yes,
and
provided that stuff is very small.
Yeah, they always look like babies, I think.
With the big head and big eyes in relationship to the body.
The eyes are huge. Yeah, the eyes are huge. And they probably eat like tiny, tiny little bugs just in the forest there.
Little gnats
in the leaves.
And things.
Yeah. They giving it a common name? Didn't see one.
I can't say I did see one either.
No.
I think it's just got to be the dreamy dwarf chameleon then.
Yeah.
Or leaf chameleon. Leaf chameleon rather than dwarf chameleon, right? So the dreamy leaf chameleon.
Yeah, or probably the no-fee leaf chameleon maybe. But yeah. But apparently in 28 minutes of searching, they found 8. So it's easy to find. And we got a picture here from Eric Wachtel. So thanks, Eric, who'd been to this place and actually got a chance to see one, which is pretty awesome. So thanks for sharing that picture with us.
Yeah. They're great looking little guys.
So let's move on to some any other business, Ben. Mm-hmm. We got some business to talk about. And actually, I just saw this morning. This is kind of hot off the press, big news. And essentially, there's a paper come out, and it's all to do with using snake venoms using AI, machine learning, deep learning. I never understand the distinction between those things. You've got
to pick the one that's most marketable at the time, right?
Oh, that has got to be AI right now. It's so hot right now.
There you go.
Get this so machine learning out of here. Yeah. AI's hot. So they basically used this AI tool called RF diffusion, and what it does is it takes you show it a protein structure, and it can use AI to build a kind of opposing protein structure, as I understand it. And so they gave it some proteins from snake venoms, and in one of them, it created a sort of opposite protein, which should, in theory, sort of bind to it and null it. And it seems to work. It seems to actually help. So they injected the snake venom protein into a mouse, and then injected this, AI-assisted created protein that they had made.
Yeah, these little binders are what they're calling them, right? Sort of protein binders.
Protein binder. Yeah. And it saved the life of the mouse. It stopped the little venom component from hurting the animal, which is pretty bonkers. I mean, you were saying, this isn't by any means a kind of panacea yet, because
that's what they're saying. That's what they're that's what they're saying, is that it's not a panacea yet, because it's one bit of the venom being dealt with, and venoms obviously have a lot of we refer to them on the podcast all the time when we talk about them. Authors always bring up that they're a cocktail, right? Like all these papers said, something cocktail, because it is a mix of different elements. Massive deal, but to get it all the way to an effective anti-venom for the sort of deployment, and actually in real world scenarios, you do need probably a whole suite of these different binders that are tackling each different element of the venom. But even, let's say you get sort of 2 or 3 working well, and it knocks out a aspect of the venom. That would still be a massive, you don't have to have complete neutralization to have a massive beneficial impact, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, quite. And I mean, you're right. They're very cautious about their results, and rightfully so. But it's exciting to think that these kinds of things can be used, because I would imagine that AI has this ability to iterate so many more times than humans could. Like if you were trying to test this by coming up with these different protein designs by yourself, I have no idea how complex that would be, but I imagine it would be something which would be like a life's work rather than just like get this really clever AI software to do it. So really nice paper. And we just thought we'd mention that because it's nice to have some hope. Snakebite still affects a hell of a lot of people. It maims a hell of a lot of people. So a step in the right direction and something to be optimistic about in its treatment.
Yes, but just making antivenom cheaper and more accessible would be a big step.
Cut out the middleman of having to pump the venom through a horse as well. Seems like a good step, because it's always wildly impractical.
It just seems great, doesn't it?
We are going to need to find jobs for a lot of those horses, though. That's a thing.
What?
Well, think how many unemployed horses there are going to be when there's no need to make.
They can be retired. It's fine.
Yeah, I was having this discussion with someone. I was having this discussion with someone the other day. Actually,
no, it's fine.
What are we going to do with all the taxi drivers?
Retirement houses, horses, homes for horses.
What are we going to do with all the taxi drivers when AI takes over?
They can live with the horses. They can look after the horses. It's perfect. Like, it's a self-fixing system.
If AI was equitable, then everyone would just have to work a little bit less. That would be really sweet.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm sure they can find hobbies, enjoy their lives. All right, awesome, cool. Have you got any other business beyond that?
Nope. That's it for me. Cool venom news, cool toad business, awesome new chameleon species.
Yeah, great stuff. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can. If you've got a question, if you've got a correction, herphighlights@gmail.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram, herp_highlights. I am on Instagram too, Tom_E_major. And that's it. We will catch you next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.